All right, so if I go back and I look at what we've done, we have talked about a number of these amendments already. We talked about voting based on race. We have addressed the direct election of senators. I know that's not even in the right spot. We have talked voting um, voting based on gender. We have also touched base on the poll tax, and we have already addressed the issue of the voting age. So apparently that didn't work so well, but you get the point that I'm trying to make. The 26th Amendment, maybe if I don't know. We'll move this one up a little bit, and then I'll try to get another one in there. 26 is the voting based on age. So we've got a number of amendments that we still need to go through. So I'm just going to jump back in. We looked at the voting amendments, and now we're going to look at the amendments that are based on some social issues. And I think the most important one that we need to touch base on is this one. This is referencing the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment is 1865, and that is the abolishment of slavery. One that I wish we didn't even have in our Constitution, but it is an ugly part of our history. As a result of the abolishment of slavery in 1865, the question came up then, what is the terminology? What do we refer to these former slaves in terms of politics, in terms of economics, in terms of just citizenship? And so there was big debate over what the terminology, what would be the political significance, the economic significance of former slaves. And that's where we end up with the 14th Amendment, which comes into the process 3 years later. Now, the 14th Amendment actually has two very important parts to it. The first part is the fact that it addresses the issue of citizenship. And in the Constitution, it says you are a citizen if you are born or naturalized. So any person who's born on U.S. soil is automatically a U.S. citizen. And if you're not born on U.S. soil, you have the ability to become a U.S. citizen through a very lengthy legal process. And we talked a little bit about that in class. And so that's the first big one. And it said that many of the former slaves that were in question here, they were born in the United States, so they were automatically considered U.S. citizens. The other big part of the 14th Amendment is the state due process. And we talked a little bit about, we talked about due process with the Fifth Amendment and how that provides fair and equal treatment under the law, equality under the law for the federal system. The 14th Amendment gets added in with the citizenship definition, but also then constitutionally requires that states also provide due process to its citizens. And so what we sometimes will hear is the term selective, and I'm going to drop that, incorporation, tied to the 14th Amendment. Now, just because the 14th Amendment says states have to provide due process to its citizens didn't automatically mean that all the protections in the Constitution automatically protected people at the state government level. That was not the case. And that is part of what has been the court's responsibility since the 14th Amendment went in, is that they have to decide if a state, through a state law, not federal here, but if through a state law, if their citizens are being treated by violation of due process. Now, I think one of the most recent examples of this was the same-sex marriage issue. The first case that address the same-sex marriage issue was a federal case. And that is, the Supreme Court said that due process at the federal level through the Fifth Amendment allows for people of same genders to get married without government discrimination. Well, that didn't stop necessarily the states from having to do so. And so cases were going to the Supreme Court asking if states could restrict these marriages as well. And in 2015, with the Burgefell versus Hodges, that case came back and the Supreme Court said that due process is extended to individuals who are getting married with the same gender, even in the state level government. So that basically told the states that through the 14th Amendment due process, states also had to provide equal treatment under the Constitution, and actually identified marriage as a constitutional protection. So this 14th Amendment may very well be one of the most important amendments that we have in our Constitution. So it's not an amendment that is to be taken lightly, and it's really an amendment that not many people know about, but are affected by it on a daily basis. All right, so 14th Amendment, 13th and 14th Amendment we've addressed. Then we get down to this one, and this particular image is going to give us some idea of what this one is referring to. And I think the video I linked on how to remember the 27 amendments, they do a really nice job with this one. And what we're talking about is when you turn 16 and you being the age of being able to drive, also comes another responsibility. The 16th Amendment is the government's permission to tax your income. Yes, I know in Article 1, Section 8, it says that Congress can tax, but the question was, what were they taxing? This is more specifically saying that not only can the federal government tax, but they can specifically tax one's income. So easy way to remember it, at 16, that's when you generally start paying taxes or getting a job or driving, and so the issue of income tax comes into play as well. Finally, we have these two. We have two amendments that I still am always amazed by this, but we have two amendments in our Constitution that deal with liquor, as odd as that is to think about. And so first one, I mean, liquor was considered to be one of the potential villains of society, and the idea that liquor made people do things and it increased crime rates. Well, let's address the issue of alcoholic beverages by literally prohibiting the sale, the manufacture, the transportation of liquor. So the 18th Amendment added to the Constitution in 1919, which is interesting because we have 1919 root beer. That's where it gets its name from. The 8th Amendment literally prohibits the manufacturing, the transportation, and the consumption of alcoholic intoxicating liquors. That just led to even more problems, because then we get into the bootleggers and we get into the mafia, the mob, and it just opens up another whole issue. And so I went and found a number of pictures. This was what pickets looked like during this time when people were saying they want their beer back. We think of pickets, but this is just kind of crazy when we think about this is one of the pickets that took place in our nation's history. With so many other issues, this was a big issue. And so by 1934, there's such a push against alcoholic beverages that we actually get the 21st Amendment that actually repeals prohibition. Because remember, the only way to change something in the Constitution is through a constitutional amendment or an interpretation by the courts. And so the way to get rid of the 18th Amendment is to actually create a second amendment that repeals the first instance. And I always find it interesting in ways to remember these as well is at age 18, you are prohibited from consumption of alcoholic beverages legally. It is not until you turn 21 that you are now able to consume, transport, purchase alcoholic beverages. That is coincidence. That is not done on purpose. That is not why the age 21 was chosen, so that it would be easier for you to understand. But that is a great way to remember these. 13, I always remember as Unlucky 13. That was an ugly part of American history. The 13th Amendment led to the definition of citizenship. And if we really want to, we can look at the 15th Amendment, 1870, also then expands the 1870, the 15th Amendment clarifies that you can't deny somebody the right to vote based on gender. So if we really want to, and it is taught, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment are actually identified as the Civil War amendments. So you start at the negative 13 and you go to 14, which expands the rights, and 15 expands it even more. 16th is when you start driving, when you get a job, so you're paying income tax. And 18th Amendment and the 21st Amendment deal with prohibition. So if I go back to this, then we're already seeing that we have addressed, let me see if I can get this to be a little bit more user-friendly. 13th Amendment was slavery. Then we have the 14th Amendment that dealt with citizenship. Oh, goodness. And state due process. And then we get to the voting based on race. Then we end up with income tax. And then we go to prohibition. And then in order to get rid of prohibition, we have to repeal prohibition. So what we're basically left with here that we need to still cover are the 12th Amendment, the 20th, the 22nd, 23rd, and the 25th. And those will come in the next lecture on how we have amendments in the Constitution that have actually changed the branches of government. So keep in mind how to remember these, because these are all going to be on the amendments quiz that you're going to be asked to take. So if you have questions, by all means, let me know. Otherwise, you can go back, watch it again. I don't know, kind of if you want to, but this is where we're at, because we've gone through the amendments that deal with voting. We've done the amendments that deal with social issues. And so what we have left is the amendments that change the branches. So with that, I'm going to end this video, and I will get the next one up momentarily.